My name is Thomas Hale. I'm 62 years old, and after spending 4 decades building homes for other families, I now live alone in the one my late wife and I built together. 4 years have passed since cancer took her, but the silence she left behind still feels fresh, like the house is holding its breath, waiting for her footsteps that will never come again. I thought the quiet was the worst thing I'd ever live with. I was wrong. Because nothing prepared me for the hollow feeling that settled in my chest the day my son married a woman I knew almost nothing about. He introduced her to me barely 2 months before the wedding. Her name was Lena, or at least that's what she told us. A soft voice, polite smile, but eyes that never matched the expressions on her face. When I looked at her, I felt something cold move through me. Not fear. Not dislike. Just wrongness. Like shaking hands with someone who isn't really looking at you but at the wallet sticking out of your pocket. My son didn't notice. He was blinded by new love and the desperate need to move on from his mother's death. I understood that. I even wanted to support it. But everything about the way she inserted herself into his life felt rushed and strangely calculated. She never spoke about her family. She changed the subject every time I tried to get to know her. She claimed she had no social media, no childhood photos, no close friends who could attend the wedding. She brushed off my questions with a sweetness so forced it tasted bitter. The wedding was small. Too small. No family on her side. No history. No roots. My son kept saying she was private. But people aren't that private. Not unless they're hiding something. And yet. I stayed quiet. I told myself I was being an overprotective old man. I told myself loneliness was making me suspicious. I told myself to let my son be happy. But 2 weeks after the wedding, something happened, something small, something quick, that tore those excuses to shreds and made me realize I wasn't imagining anything. She slipped. Just once. But once was all it took. Before I continue, if you enjoy real, gripping life stories, make sure you subscribe, it helps more people hear what truly happens behind closed doors. Anyway. It started on an ordinary evening. I had stopped by their house to drop off some tools my son had borrowed. She answered the door, startled, almost frightened, and for a split second, I saw a completely different woman standing there. Different posture, different voice, different name on a package lying behind her. A name she had never used. She kicked the box away with her foot and told me I had imagined it. That was the moment I felt the shift. The moment the silence in my home suddenly seemed safer than whatever she was bringing into my son's life. And the moment I realized. My son's new wife wasn't who she said she was. And I was going to find out why. They invited me to dinner the following Sunday like it was routine, just family, Ethan said, casual, as if inviting me over settled everything. I told myself I should be grateful for the company. I told myself that going would be the kind, patient thing to do. I told myself a lot of things that night because the truth is uglier. I went because the house felt too quiet and because, even at 62, I needed to see my son. Their place smelled of citrus cleaner and something else, expensive perfume masking something cheaper. Lena greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her handshake was cool, precise, like she'd practiced the motion. Olivia, my late wife, used to say people reveal themselves in small habits, the way they fold a napkin, the way they laugh at nothing. Lena laughed when she was supposed to laugh. She answered with the right words, in the right tone. It should have put me at ease. Instead it set my teeth on edge. Dinner began like any other modern suburban meal, soft music, carefully arranged plates, conversation that hovered on the surface. Ethan launched into his usual update, work milestones, new clients, a plan for a great leap forward. He spoke with the earnestness of a man who reads other people's success as proof he's on the right track. Lena chimed in occasionally, offering agreeable comments, never contradicting, never contributing anything intimate about herself. It was as if she were a radio playing background music, pleasant, unobtrusive, always on cue. Halfway through the main course, my phone buzzed against my leg. I fumbled with it, reflexively glancing at the caller ID, no one I knew. I let it go to voicemail, but on the arm of the couch, Ethan's phone buzzed too. He glanced at the screen, annoyed, and put it face down. Lena's hand moved almost at the same time. Her fingers hovered over her own bag, just out of sight, and her smile tightened. A second later her phone lit up, an unknown number, a short message. Her face changed the way a stage actor's does when the cue is unexpected. For a sliver of a second, she looked genuinely terrified. Then she composed herself, tucked the phone into the lining of her purse and excused herself to the kitchen. While she was out of the room, I heard her. Not with my ears, exactly, more with the small, careful attention of someone who has spent his life hearing would settle and metal sigh. The whispering started as a murmur and sharpened, a voice, quick and urgent, the words clipped, the tone edged like a knife. I couldn't make out the exact phrases from the doorway, but I caught fragments. He called, "Don't tell him, we'll fix it," and a hiss like warning or command. It wasn't playful, it was raw, urgent, panicked. When she came back, she wiped her hands on a towel that hadn't been wet and rejoined the table with the same perfectly practiced ease. Ethan noticed nothing wrong. He laughed at a joke, reached for my glass, and the world resumed as if a tremor had never passed beneath the surface. After dinner, as I put the tools back in my truck in the dark, a box on Lena's kitchen counter caught my eye through the window. There was a courier label with a different surname than the one she'd given us. The name was unfamiliar, bold on the package like someone who expected to remain unseen. Inside the house, through a half-open curtain, I thought I heard her phone again, another frantic whisper. She spoke to someone who wasn't there in the room, and the voice that answered was flat and clinical, the kind that gives orders. I drove home with my hands white-knuckled on the wheel. The moonlight painted the dash silver and I realized my heartbeat had been steady the whole ride. Not from fear of a stranger breaking into a house, but from a deeper, colder dread, the thought that the danger wasn't outside the door. It was sitting at that table, smiling and passing the salt. I told myself it might be nothing, imagination, loneliness, grief sharpening ordinary noises into threats. But the whispering, the phone, the hidden name on the box, those tiny facts kept colliding in my head like loose nails in a toolbox. They fit together in a way I couldn't ignore. At the end of the driveway I stopped the truck, shut off the engine, and felt something settle like a stone in my chest. She had lied. And I was going to find out why. The morning after that dinner, I stood in my kitchen staring at the cup of coffee I'd made out of habit. It tasted bitter, like my mind refused to let me slip back into routine. The images from the night before kept replaying, the hidden text message, the whispered call, the name on the courier box that didn't belong to the woman who now carried my son's last name. I told myself I'd wait, observe, take things slow. But the truth is, something inside me had already shifted. When you've built houses your whole life, you learn that tiny cracks, barely visible at first, are often signs of a much deeper problem. 2 days later, I drove to my son's house with a toolbox he hadn't asked for. I told him I wanted to check a loose hinge on the back gate. That was my excuse. The real reason was simple, I needed to see her again, to make sense of the feeling tightening around my ribs. Lena answered the door before I could knock twice. She looked surprised, not confused, not uncomfortable, but alert, as if she'd been preparing for someone to arrive unexpectedly. Her posture was stiff, her smile too wide, and for the first time, I noticed how carefully she controlled her face. Every expression felt like an act she was tired of performing. "Oh, Thomas. What a nice surprise." Her voice floated warmly, but her eyes flicked to something behind her, something she didn't want me to see. "I'm just here to fix that hinge on the gate," I said. "Shouldn't take me long." She hesitated. A slight pause, half a breath too long, before she stepped aside. "Of course. Make yourself at home." I walked down the hallway, and a chill ran up my spine when I saw a stack of envelopes on the small entry table. 3 of them had different names addressed to the same house, none of them hers. None were my son's either. Before I could study them, she appeared beside me with a speed that startled me. "Oh, those aren't important," she said, scooping them up and pressing them against her hip. "Old tenants. We get their mail all the time." Old tenants. This house was new. My son had bought it 6 months ago. I knew because I'd helped him install the shelving in the garage. There were no old tenants. No one had lived here before them. She realized her mistake immediately. I saw the flicker of fear, real fear, cross her face. She recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. Down the hall, my son appeared, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Dad? You didn't call." "I was in the area," I lied. He glanced between me and Lena, and for the first time, I noticed how his posture changed when she stood near him, more guarded, more careful, like a man navigating thin ice. We walked together to the backyard while she lingered in the kitchen, watching us from behind the glass door. As I pretended to tighten screws on a hinge that didn't need fixing, I spoke quietly. "Ethan, is everything okay?" He stiffened. "Why wouldn't it be? You seem distant." "I'm fine, Dad." Short. Defensive. Not like him. "She's good to me," he added, as if rehearsing a line. "I just wish you would give her a chance." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him she was hiding something. But the way his shoulders tightened made me swallow my words. Something had its claws in him, fear, guilt, or something worse. When I finished, I walked back through the house alone. Lena wasn't in sight, but I heard movement upstairs. I stopped near the bottom of the staircase, and that's when I saw it. On the table, half slid under a magazine, was an ID badge from a workplace she had never mentioned. Different name again. Different photo angle. Same face. When she came back down, she noticed where I was standing. Her smile vanished. "Did you find what you needed?" she asked with an edge that wasn't there before. "Yes," I answered. "I did." And for the first time, she looked at me not as her husband's father, but as a threat. That was the moment I knew, whatever she was hiding, she wasn't planning to stop. And I wasn't planning to look away. 3 nights later, just after 11, my landline rang. No one calls my landline anymore. The sound carved straight through the quiet, sharp enough to make my heart jump. I let it ring twice, then picked up. A man's voice, low, uneasy, breath tight, said only one sentence before hanging up. "Do you know who your son's wife really is?" The line clicked dead. I stood there with the receiver still pressed to my ear long after the dial tone returned. My hands had built entire homes, carved beams, installed roofs in winter storms, but in that moment, they trembled. Someone out there knew something. Something they were afraid to say out loud. I dialed Ethan immediately. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. Sleep was a lost cause. I paced my living room like a man trapped in a box too small for his thoughts. I replayed every strange detail, different surnames on mail, the whispered phone call, the tension in her eyes when I noticed her ID badge. All of it formed a shape I didn't want to see clearly yet. Around midnight, I grabbed my keys and drove to my son's house. I told myself it was concern, fatherly instinct, but the truth is darker. I was afraid something had already happened. The street was quiet. Their lights were off. I almost convinced myself to go home, but then a shadow moved behind the living room window. A quick movement, someone pacing. I stepped closer. It wasn't Ethan. It was her. She was talking on her phone, pacing like a caged animal. Her tone was sharp, frantic. I caught only pieces through the partially open window. "He called him, don't contact me again." I said, "Don't, do you understand?" No mistakes. Her voice changed pitch suddenly, high, thin, controlled panic. Then she ended the call, shut the curtains in one violent jerk, and the house went dark. That was enough for me. I left before she could spot me. But she must have sensed something. Because the next morning, she texted me. A paragraph-long message. Polished. Manipulative. Poison in polite wording. Thomas, I feel like you're trying to undermine my marriage. Ethan says you're stressed and lonely. I know you miss your wife. But your behavior is hurting us. I hope you'll stop imagining problems. We only want peace. It was the kind of message an abuser sends, calm on the surface, barbed underneath. I stared at it for a long time before replying with a simple, I'll keep my concerns to myself. Less than a minute later, she typed back. Good. That one word told me everything about her intentions. Later that afternoon, I drove to the police station. I didn't know what to tell them exactly, so I started simple. I want to verify someone's identity, I said. A family member. The officer behind the desk looked up a name I gave, one of the 3 she'd used. After a moment, he said, no such person in our system. At least not under this identity. I tried another name. Then another. Every answer was the same. No records. No history. No trace. The officer hesitated. You said she married your son recently. Are you sure these names are hers? I'm sure, I said. Too sure. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. If she's using multiple identities, that's not a small issue. You need to be careful, sir. Careful. I'd been careful my whole life, measuring twice, cutting once, planning ahead. I wasn't the type of man who confused shadows for threats. But as I walked out into the cold evening air, something tightened in my chest. The realization that I was standing on a foundation built out of lies. That night, I called Ethan again and asked to talk. He sounded irritated. Dad, are you still suspicious of Lena? She thinks you don't like her. It's not about liking, I said. It's about knowing who she really is. He exhaled heavily. She told me you called the police. Dad, what are you doing? It's embarrassing. She's hiding something. She's private, Dad. Not everyone wants to give their entire life story to a man they barely know. She married you, I said quietly. I think I have the right to know who she is. That silence on the phone, sharp, heavy, told me I'd crossed into dangerous ground. Ethan's voice finally came back, low and brittle. Stop digging. I mean it. He hung up. I sat alone in the dark afterward, staring at the phone in my hand, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. My own son was defending a woman whose past didn't exist. A woman who changed names the way others change clothes. A woman who snapped into panic at a single message. And even worse. Someone out there had called me, terrified, to warn me. That's when I understood. I wasn't imagining the threat. I was already inside of it. For most of my life, I thought of myself as a simple man. A builder. A husband. A father. Someone who fixed broken hinges, patched roofs, and solved problems with quiet persistence. But after that phone call, that message, and the way my own son defended a stranger over me, something inside me changed. I woke up the next morning with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where my wife and I shared our first breakfast as newlyweds, and I could almost hear her voice again, gentle, steady, always wiser than mine. Trust your instincts, Tom, she used to say whenever life cornered me. When something feels off, you dig until you find the truth. She'd said that once when our neighbors sold a house with a crooked frame. Another time when a young carpenter on my team was being taken advantage of by a contractor. And she was right every single time. So why had I ignored that voice now? Because it was my son's marriage? Because I didn't want to be the overbearing father? Or because I didn't want to believe someone that close could be dangerous? That morning, I stopped making excuses. I pulled out a legal pad from the drawer, old habit from my working days, and wrote down everything I knew about Lena. Every odd moment, every slip. Every name I had seen. Every time she reacted too quickly or too harshly. When the list was complete, I stared at it. It didn't look like a list. It looked like a map, one leading straight into a lie. I decided I wasn't going to confront her anymore. Confrontation only works on people who feel guilt, shame, or fear of consequences. People like Lena don't fear confrontation. They manipulate it. No, if I wanted answers, I had to become the kind of man she would never expect me to be. Methodical. Patient. Invisible. I opened my laptop, took a deep breath, and started with the basics. Names. Phone numbers. Addresses. Employers. Everything she had ever given in conversation. The first name pulled up nothing. The second name pulled up even less. The third name, one written on that courier box, brought up a record. But it wasn't her face. It was another woman. Younger. Different. A stolen identity? Borrowed? Shared? I didn't know. But it was the first thread I could grab. So I grabbed it. I researched background check services, watched tutorials, learned the digital paper trail tricks younger folks use. I wasn't fast, but I was precise. Loneliness teaches you patience, grief teaches you focus. Within 2 hours, I found something she had missed. The phone number she used on that whispered call had an older registration under a different name. A name she'd never mentioned. A name tied to a city she claimed she had never visited. My pulse had been steady until then. But that discovery made my heart pound like I was back on a job site, lifting beams heavier than my own body weight. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and whispered into the empty kitchen. She's lying about everything. And then. Another thought followed so quickly it felt like a blow. If she lied about her past, what else is she planning? I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I didn't want to think the worst. But the truth is, the worst was already happening. I just didn't have the full picture yet. That was the moment I stopped being a father trying to understand his son's wife. And became an investigator trying to prevent the collapse of the only family I had left. The next step was clear. I had to dig deeper, far deeper, into the identity she tried so desperately to bury. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid, fear had already burned itself out. What I felt was something colder, steadier, carved from the same place inside me that once allowed me to build houses beam by beam, nail by nail. When something was wrong on a job site, you didn't panic. You inspected. You tested. You found the flaw. Then you fixed it. And my son's marriage. It was a structure with a flaw so deep I could feel it vibrating in my bones. I brewed a pot of coffee, sat down at my desk, and got to work. The number she used during that whispered call wasn't easy to trace, but nothing online ever truly disappears. Buried in a third-party data archive, the number was tied to an old prepaid account purchased in another state. One Lena claimed she'd never visited. The account had been activated under the name Annabelle R. Annabelle. Another new name. Another crack in the story she fed us. I searched that name. For a long time, nothing came up. No social media, no public employment records, no tax history. People like Lena don't leave digital footprints. But eventually, after digging through pages most people never scroll to, I found an old forum thread with a brief mention. Beware of a woman calling herself Annabelle, left town after an incident. Avoid. No further details. No elaboration. Just the warning. Enough to send a shudder through me. I kept digging. When the missing pieces form a pattern, your instincts sharpen. Mine were screaming. I opened a background check service, one of the reputable ones that actually pulls legal records, and entered each name she had used. The results started trickling in, fragmented but damning. Under one alias, she had a minor arrest record for failure to comply in another state. Under a second alias, she had worked briefly at a financial services office, terminated after a discrepancy. Under a third alias, she had listed an emergency contact who had filed a restraining order against her. A restraining order. Filed by a man nearly twice her age. My chest tightened. Why? What happened? What pattern was I staring at? But the deeper I went, the more disturbing the details became. 2 counties over, one of her aliases appeared in a police bulletin, not as a suspect, but as a related party, in a fraud investigation tied to a group that targeted recently widowed or newly wealthy individuals. The notice didn't give much context, but it didn't have to. I had seen enough scams in my life to recognize the outline. Still, I needed more. Something solid. That's when I decided to search property records, not for her, but for the addresses she had once given in passing. A favorite restaurant back home. An apartment she used to rent. A friend's house she stayed with. She had dropped these details carelessly, like crumbs. She thought I wasn't paying attention. She thought wrong. Almost every address led nowhere. Except one. An apartment building in a small city 3 hours away. Registered resident 4 years ago, Lena K. But the shock came with the second line. Forwarding address on file, none. Marked, left abruptly. A note from the building manager listed multiple complaints and a personal disturbance. No specifics, just enough to paint a picture. I leaned forward, gripping the sides of the desk. She'd disappeared once before. And she was laying foundations to do it again, this time with my son's life tied to her escape route. But the worst was still ahead. I opened a deeper investigative database, one used for tracing identity inconsistencies. I uploaded the ID badge photo on her counter, curious if it would match anything else. The system pinged within minutes. Not one match. Not 2. 4. 4 different states. 4 different variations of her identity. Same face. Different names. Different ages. Different pasts. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't an overprotective father sensing trouble where there was none. This was a pattern of identity shifting. Calculated. Planned. Refined. She wasn't hiding something small. She was hiding her entire life. I forced myself to keep going, even as a cold sweat formed along my neck. I clicked through another record, one linked to the name from the courier box, a name I hadn't seen in any conversation. This identity had a note next to it. A small, chilling category. Associated with missing persons case, not accused, but mentioned. I sat back hard, my chair bumping against the wall. A missing persons case. I clicked it twice, but most of the file was sealed. What little I could see wasn't comforting. Individual of interest lived with missing party approximately 2 years prior. Disappearance unresolved. Case inactive. The file didn't blame her. It didn't say what happened. But the implication was enough to make my stomach twist. It was past midnight by now. My coffee had gone cold. The filter of exhaustion made everything sharper, not duller. The silence of the house pressed against me like a force, pushing me toward a truth I no longer wanted to uncover but couldn't stop chasing. I clicked the last alias, the one tied to the old restraining order. This record was more detailed. The filing party. Michael E. Age 57. Filed 5 years ago. Reason cited. Unstable behavior, threats, manipulation, attempted financial access. My blood froze. It read like a warning written specifically for my son. I felt my breath shake as I leaned in, reading each line 3 times to make sure I wasn't imagining it. At the bottom of the file, near the final note from the officer handling the case, was the detail that changed everything. Subject attempted access to petitioner's accounts using spouse authorization forms. Marriage not verified. Spouse. She had called herself his spouse. She had tried this before. And now she was doing it again, with my son. The realization hit me with the violent clarity of a hammer to steel. My son wasn't her first target. He wasn't her first rushed marriage. He wasn't her first victim. She had a history, a long, calculated pattern of latching onto men who were vulnerable, lonely, newly grieving, or financially comfortable. Men like my son. Men like that petitioner. Men who didn't see the danger until it was too late. As I sat there, surrounded by the glow of my computer screen and the weight of every sinister discovery, the truth settled into my bones. My son wasn't married to a woman with a troubled past. He was married to someone who reinvented herself every time she drained the life out of her last host. My jaw clenched. My heart hardened. Whatever she was planning next. Whatever script she had written for my son's future, I was going to rewrite it. But first, I needed to understand how deep her lies went, and how far she was willing to go. And that meant I needed to look not at what she'd done, but at why she kept running. And who, exactly, she was running from. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became that none of this started recently. The lies weren't new. The behavior wasn't new. The danger wasn't new. She had practiced this long before she ever stepped into my son's life. I just hadn't seen it. But once the truth started forming, memories I'd buried under politeness and wishful thinking came flooding back, each one now sharpened into something unmistakable. The first time I ever met her, she arrived at my door unannounced, standing there with a bouquet of cheap flowers and a smile that was too bright to be real. Ethan had texted saying he wanted to introduce his special someone, and I, foolishly eager to see him happy again, opened the door with my heart already soft. But the moment she stepped inside, she scanned my living room the way a person sizes up a place before they decide whether it's worth stealing from. Her eyes flicked over the old family photos, the furniture, the walls, the corners. Not admiring, calculating. Back then, I brushed it off. I told myself she was nervous. Now I know better. The second memory hit even harder. It was a month before the wedding. She'd come over with Ethan, claiming she wanted to bond. She sat across from me, legs crossed neatly, hands folded like she was posing for a photograph. We talked about nothing important, weather, work, recipes, and at one point, the conversation drifted to home repairs. I mentioned, casually, that background checks were becoming more common for contractors and tenants. She froze. Not visibly. Not obviously. But to a man who spent 40 years watching would bow under pressure and knowing exactly when something was wrong, her reaction was unmistakable. Her shoulders stiffened. Her breath hitched. She blinked twice, too fast. And then she laughed. Forced. High-pitched. Wrong. Oh, I'd never pass anything like that, she joked. But her eyes didn't joke. They flicked sideways, to Ethan, measuring whether he noticed. He didn't. But I did. I should have questioned it. I should have paid attention. The third flashback was from the wedding day itself. A courthouse ceremony. No guests on her side. Not a single family member. Not one friend. She said her parents were strict and disapproved of her choices. Then, 2 minutes later, she said her parents were deceased. Later still, she said she didn't grow up with family. 3 different versions of her past. One conversation. But Ethan was too love-struck to catch the inconsistencies, and I chose to give her the benefit of the doubt. The moment that haunts me most, though, came exactly 1 week after the ceremony. I'd been invited over for dinner, and she brought out a stack of envelopes. "Bills," she said lightly, tapping them on the table. "Marriage has so much paperwork. Isn't that right, Thomas?" She slid them toward Ethan. "Sign these for the utilities, honey." She said it casually, too casually. But I saw the slight tremor in her fingers. I saw the way she positioned the papers so the top page looked harmless, yet the second page beneath had a signature line boxed off separately. I saw the way she angled her body so I couldn't read the header. Most men would have missed it. But not someone who'd reviewed thousands of construction contracts. Not someone who had caught forged billing signatures for subcontractors more times than he could count. So I leaned forward with a joke, pretending I couldn't read the print. Her hand slapped over the corner of the page before I could glimpse the title. Quick. Reflexive. Panicked. She covered it with a sweet laugh. "Oops, wrong form." She snatched the papers back. Pulled the suspicious sheet free. Tucked it into her purse with a flourish. Ethan didn't notice a thing. But I did. And now, sitting alone in my dimly lit office with a pile of evidence staring back at me, those memories weren't harmless snapshots anymore. They were red flags I should have seen burning long before I ever touched a background check. Everything she had done, the rushed wedding, the inconsistent stories, the staged sweetness, was part of a pattern she'd perfected. She didn't start lying when she married my son. She started lying the moment she walked through my door. And the worst part? She was just getting started. I realized quickly that what I was dealing with wasn't some garden-variety liar or a troubled young woman running from a messy breakup. No, this was someone who changed identities the way snakes shed skin. Someone who knew how to erase herself and reappear somewhere new with a fresh name, a fresh story, and a fresh victim. And I was in way over my head. So I called the only person I trusted with something this serious, Frank Delaney, a man I'd known for nearly 30 years. He was a retired sheriff's deputy, the kind of man who had spent his career reading the truth in people's eyes long before they opened their mouths. After his retirement, he'd gotten licensed as a private investigator, mostly working fraud and missing persons cases. If anyone could help me navigate this, it was him. When I phoned him, he picked up on the first ring. "Tom. Haven't heard from you in a while. Everything all right?" "No," I said. "Not even close." There was no hesitation on his end. "Come by the office." Frank's office was a cramped room above a bar downtown, cluttered with old case files and the smell of stale coffee. He looked older than I remembered, deeper lines, grayer beard, but his eyes were still the same sharp steel they'd always been. "What's going on?" he asked as I handed him my notes. I watched his face shift slowly from curiosity, to confusion, then to something darker. "Jesus, Tom," he whispered. "This isn't normal." "No," I said. "I know." He spread the papers across his desk, the aliases, the restraining order notes, the addresses, the missing persons link. He read every line, not once interrupting, not once looking up. When he finally leaned back in his chair, he exhaled the way a man does when the truth is worse than he expected. "You said your son married her?" "Yes." "And he doesn't know any of this?" "He thinks I'm imagining everything," I said. "He thinks she's the victim." Frank shook his head slowly. "That's classic. People like her isolate their targets. Make them doubt everyone else." "Is she dangerous?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. He studied one of the records, specifically the restraining order case with the older man. "Tom, men don't file these lightly. Not at that age. And they definitely don't use words like unstable, manipulative, and attempted access unless something serious happened." A cold truth settled between us. "So what do I do?" "You don't confront her," he said immediately. That's rule number 1. I wasn't planning on it. He nodded. Good. Because if she realizes you're onto her, she could disappear in a heartbeat. And she won't leave empty-handed. She'll take your son down with her. My jaw clenched. She's already pulling him away from me. She'll do more, Frank said. These people drain accounts. They forge signatures. They exploit marriages from the inside. If she's already used multiple identities, and if she was involved in any missing person investigation. Tom, your son is living with a predator. The words hit me harder than a hammer ever had. Frank tapped one of my notes. This number, the one tied to the prepaid phone. I can run it through a more advanced system. I can track associated accounts, locations, previous owners. Might take some time, but I'll get something. And the names? He nodded. I'll run them too. All of them. A heavy silence filled the room before I spoke again. I can't lose my son, I said quietly. Not to someone like her. Frank's voice softened, but the steel beneath it stayed sharp. Then listen to me carefully. From this point on, you play dumb. You smile. You act like the friendly father-in-law. You go to dinner if they invite you. You don't question her. You don't mention anything suspicious. You give her no reason to change her behavior. Why? Because predators slip when they get comfortable, he said. And right now, she thinks you're harmless. That's your greatest advantage. He leaned forward. I'll gather what we need. But you, Tom, you're going to have to walk into that house like nothing's wrong. Can you do that? I thought of my son. His tired smile. His hopeful eyes. The same eyes he had as a boy when he built birdhouses with me in the garage. Yes, I said. I can do that. Frank nodded once. Good. Because if we're right about who she is, we're about to expose something she's spent her whole life running from. And I walked out of that office knowing one thing with absolute certainty. This wasn't just about protecting my son anymore. It was about stopping a woman who had built her life on lies, and making sure her next victim wasn't my family. Frank's instructions replayed in my mind like a mantra. Act normal. Don't confront her. Let her think you're harmless. I'd spent my life solving problems with my hands, measuring, sawing, securing. But now I had to solve one with my face. With my voice. With a performance convincing enough to fool a woman who had reinvented herself half a dozen times. It felt unnatural. Wrong. But if pretending to be naive was the only way to protect my son, then I'd become the best damn actor she'd ever met. 3 days later, Ethan texted me. Come for dinner Sunday. Lena insists. Says she wants to apologize for last time. Apologize. That word sat on my tongue like acid. Frank warned me, the moment she senses suspicion, she doubles down with charm. It's what manipulators do. They pivot. They soften. They perform. And Ethan, blinded by the illusion of a fresh start, would lap it up like a thirsty dog. I typed back. Of course. Looking forward to it. I hated how easy that lie came out. Sunday evening, I pulled into their driveway exactly on time. Predictability was part of the facade. If I came too early, she'd think I wanted something. If I came late, she'd think I'd been talking to someone. As I walked up the steps, I rehearsed the expression I practiced in the mirror, polite, mild, harmless. Lena opened the door before I could knock. Thomas, she exclaimed, stepping forward with a warmth so artificial it should have come with a price tag. I'm so glad you came. She touched my arm lightly, a gesture of fake intimacy meant to disarm. I felt the urge to pull away but forced myself to smile instead. Thank you for having me. Inside, the house looked staged. Clean to the point of sterility. Something roasted in the oven, filling the air with the false promise of comfort. The lights were dimmed, not cozy dim, but calculated dim, like she wanted control over every shadow. Ethan appeared from the living room, smiling too widely. "Dad! Great to see you." His voice had that forced brightness people use when they're trying to prove everything is fine. I hugged him, but I felt something off, tension in his shoulders, hesitation in the way he leaned in. My son wasn't just stressed. He was building a wall between us, and she was handing him the bricks. Her tells. Dinner began, and it didn't take long for my act to be tested. "So, Thomas," she said sweetly, pouring me water as if I were a guest of honor, "I hope there are no hard feelings from before." "Oh, none at all," I lied. "Just a misunderstanding." She held my gaze too long, as if searching for cracks. Her eyes were sharp, almost predatory. But I let mine soften. Let them look tired. Old. Harmless. That satisfied her. She smiled again, but the smile slipped at the edges. As she passed a platter to Ethan, I saw her glance, not at him, but at me. Watching. Measuring. She was analyzing my micro-expressions the way I had analyzed grain patterns in wood. I realized then. She was paranoid. And paranoia makes people sloppy. Halfway through the meal, her phone buzzed. A subtle vibration. Barely audible. But her reaction was instant. Her hand froze midair. Her eyes flicked down. Then she snatched the phone off the table faster than anyone I've ever seen. Ethan frowned. "Everything okay?" "Work," she said immediately. "Just work." Her voice was steady, but her throat tightened. She got up, claiming she needed a second, and disappeared into the hallway. I caught the faint whisper of her voice, urgent, low, shaking, not the calm, sweet tone she used at the table. A familiar chill crawled up my spine. It was the same tenor from the night I saw her pacing by the window. When she came back, she'd reapplied lipstick. A mask reattached. But her eyes. They were colder now. Harder. It was clear. She knew something was slipping beyond her control. My son, caught in the web. After dessert, Ethan insisted we all have a drink in the living room. The insistence itself felt off, forced, like he wanted to prove some idea of harmony. As we sat, Lena watched us talk. Not participated. Watched. Like a guard dog assessing a threat. Ethan told me about work, about stress, about wanting stability. But every time his voice wavered, she would touch his knee or shoulder, and he would straighten up like she'd pressed a reset button. At one point, he left the room to grab something from upstairs. That's when it happened. Lena leaned close, not flirtatious, not friendly. Predatory. And whispered. "Why were you looking into me?" My blood turned to ice. But I kept my expression exactly as Frank taught me, confused, slightly amused, even embarrassed. "I wasn't looking into anything," I said softly. "Just, trying to understand my son's new wife." A lie, delivered flawlessly. She stared at me. 5 seconds. 10. Then she smiled. Slow. Terrifying. "Good," she said. "Because there's nothing to find." The air felt thick. Heavy. She had dropped the mask just long enough for me to see the woman beneath it. A woman capable of anything. Ethan returned, oblivious, and the moment vanished like smoke. But inside me, something settled with cold certainty. Frank was right. She was watching me. Studying me. Waiting for a sign that I knew too much. I finished my drink, played the part, said my goodbyes. But the second I stepped outside into the cool night air, I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I had walked into that house pretending to be harmless. But she had walked away believing it. which made her next moves predictable. And mine unavoidable. She thought she was ahead. She thought she held all the cards. But she didn't know Frank was investigating her. She didn't know I had a trail of names, addresses, files. And she didn't know I was preparing for the moment everything she'd built would collapse under the weight of her own lies. This dinner told me one thing. The storm was coming. And she had no idea it was aimed straight at her. Frank called me 2 days after that dinner. His voice was tense, different from the calm steadiness he usually carried. "Tom," he said, "you need to come to my office. Now." I didn't ask questions. Didn't waste time. Didn't even bother with a jacket despite the biting wind outside. I drove faster than I should have. Because I already knew, whatever he found, it wasn't small. When I stepped into his cluttered little office above the bar, he didn't offer coffee or make small talk. Instead, he handed me a thick stack of printed documents, addresses, screenshots, financial notices, court summaries. "This is everything tied to her aliases," he said. "Took some back-channel digging, but I got it." My hands tightened around the papers. "What am I looking at?" He took a deep breath. "Patterns, Tom. And not the kind you want associated with your family." He spread the documents across the desk, grouping them. "Every identity she's used follows the same cycle, enters a man's life under a false name, moves fast, gains trust, pushes for marriage or joint assets, then, right when things stabilize, she empties accounts, transfers funds, and vanishes." My stomach dropped. Frank tapped the first cluster. Alias number 1, she lived with a man in North Carolina. He reported a substantial theft from his accounts. She fled overnight. Didn't even take her clothes. He tapped the second. Alias number 2, a different state. Different man. Relationship lasted 7 months. He ended up with debt in his name he never signed for. Case dismissed due to insufficient evidence. Sound familiar? He tapped the third. The restraining order guy. He claimed she forged his signature on spousal authorization forms. Tried to gain joint access to his retirement fund. Frank's eyes lifted to meet mine. "And now you tell me she's pushing paperwork around your son?" My throat tightened. "She tried once already, the night I was at their house before the wedding." Frank nodded slowly. "This is her blueprint, Tom. She finds men who are in transition, divorced, grieving, overworked, lonely. Men who want a fresh start. She becomes their answer. Then she becomes their problem. Then she becomes their destruction." I felt the weight of every word settle into my bones. "And my son?" I whispered. "He's the perfect target," Frank said. "Widowed father's boy, still wounded from losing his mother, newly independent, financially stable, craving connection. She saw him coming before he even said hello." My chest tightened until breathing felt like swallowing stones. Frank flipped over the last sheet, a loan application. "This is the worst part," he said quietly. 2 weeks ago, she started paperwork for a spousal consolidation loan." My eyes snapped up. "What?" "It's a scheme scammers use. She applies for a loan that merges your son's credit with hers. Once approved, she gets access to everything, bank accounts, credit cards, retirement funds. She racks up debt, drains assets, and vanishes. The spouse gets stuck with the mess." "And Ethan?" I said. "Does he know?" Frank gave me a pitying look. If he did, he wouldn't still be defending her. I stared at the forms. Her handwriting. Her forged signature attempts. Her rehearsed lies. Her pattern. I felt my hands curl into fists. "She's going to destroy him," I murmured. "Not if we stop her." Frank opened a manila folder and pulled out a set of neatly organized documents. "I've prepared a full report. Identity inconsistencies, prior complaints, suspected fraud, potential financial exploitation. Everything. But we need to present it strategically. If we go in guns blazing, she'll twist the story and disappear. So what's the plan? We lure her into a controlled setting, he said. A meeting where she won't expect an ambush. Somewhere public, with neutral witnesses. We present the evidence. And when she cracks, and she will, your son will see the truth firsthand. I hesitated. She's clever, I said. She'll sense something. Not if it comes from you, Frank replied. You'll tell them there's a mix-up with some paperwork. Something simple. Something that puts her guard down. I thought of her smile at dinner, polished, poisonous, calculated. And beneath it, something colder, emptier. She's not going to walk in willingly, I said. Oh, she will, Frank countered. Because these people always believe they're smarter than everyone else. Always. Her arrogance is our weapon. That evening, I called Ethan. There was hesitation in his voice when he answered, the way people sound when they're torn between loyalty and doubt. Son, I said gently, I need to talk to you and Lena. It's about some financial paperwork I accidentally received with your name on it. A beat of silence. Ethan exhaled. Dad. I don't want to argue about this again. I'm not arguing, I said. I'm asking to clear something up. It won't take long. 10 minutes. I owe you that. He hesitated. Then finally. All right. We'll meet you. When? Tomorrow. 5 o'clock. I'll text the address. He agreed. But it was her voice I heard faintly in the background, sharp, irritated, whispering instructions to him. She asked him, what does he know? He told her, he said it's just a mix-up. Her reply was chillingly simple. Good. Let him think that. I ended the call. Frank was right. Her arrogance would bring her straight to us. She had no idea the walls were already closing in. And once she stepped into that meeting, her entire world, every lie, every alias, every secret, would crumble in front of the man she thought she could twist around her little finger. She was walking into her own downfall. And she didn't see it coming. The next afternoon, I arrived early at the small mediation office Frank had arranged, a neutral space that looked more like a dentist's waiting room than ground zero for someone's downfall. Neutral walls, neutral chairs, neutral lighting. Perfect for disarming a predator who believed she was still in control. Frank was already inside, seated at the long conference table with a binder in front of him, thick, organized, devastating. He looked up as I walked in. You ready? He asked. No, I said. But I'm here. It was the closest thing to readiness I could offer. At exactly 5 o'clock, the door opened. Ethan walked in first, looking tired, confused, torn. And behind him. She walked in. Lena. Perfect makeup. Perfect posture. Perfect smile. But there was something in her eyes, an alert flicker, like an animal stepping into unfamiliar terrain. Thomas, she said warmly. What's all this about? Ethan said something was wrong with paperwork. Her tone was so smooth it almost made me question reality. Almost. I gestured to the seats. Have a seat. This won't take long. She sat beside Ethan, crossing her legs in that elegant, practiced way. Frank remained silent, letting the moment settle. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. Dad, I really hope this isn't another accusation. It isn't, I said. It's the truth. I turned to Frank. Go ahead. He opened the binder. Mrs. Hale, if that's the name you're currently using, my name is Frank Delaney. I'm a licensed investigator. I was asked to review some inconsistencies regarding your identity. The smile flickered. Just a flicker, but I saw it. I don't think this is necessary, she said lightly. There's been a misunderstanding. Frank ignored her and slid the first document across the table. This is a record of 3 previous addresses tied to names you've used. None of which you disclosed on your marriage license. Ethan frowned. Wait, what? She laughed airily. This must be someone else, people get mixed up all the time in those databases. Frank placed another document on top of the first. This is a restraining order filed 5 years ago. By a man you lived with. The description, photo, height, and age match you exactly, despite the different name. Her smile died. Not faded, died. Ethan's eyes darted from the paper to her. Elena, what is that? She opened her mouth, but Frank wasn't finished. He laid out more pages, aliases, financial inconsistencies, the consolidation loan application she had initiated without Ethan's knowledge. This is the most recent, he said quietly. A loan request filed using Ethan's information. With forged signatures. A beat of silence swallowed the room. Ethan's face went ghost pale. You filed a loan in my name. Her voice cracked into a brittle whisper. That's not what it looks like. Frank's voice cut through the air like a blade. It looks like financial exploitation. Which is a criminal offense. Her mask shattered then, not slowly, not dramatically. It broke like a cheap ornament hitting concrete. Her eyes darkened. Her voice dropped an octave. You have no idea what you're talking about, she hissed. Oh, Frank said, I know exactly what I'm talking about. And so do the authorities who flagged you before. Ethan stood up abruptly, stumbling back from his chair. Tell me this isn't real, he said. Tell me you didn't lie about everything we built. She pushed her chair back, panic flickering across her face. I did it for us, she said quickly, desperately. For our future. You don't understand, your father wants to ruin us. He's jealous. He wants you miserable and alone. Stop, Ethan snapped, louder than I'd heard him speak since he was a teenager. For once, stop lying. She looked at him then, the man she believed she had completely under her thumb. And for the first time, she realized she no longer held him. She turned to me, venom sharpening her voice. You did this. You just couldn't let him go, could you? You couldn't let him be happy. I held her gaze. I wasn't trying to take him away, I said. I was trying to save him. Her breathing turned erratic. Her hands twitched. She looked toward the door, toward escape. Don't, Frank warned. The moment you step outside this room, there are officers waiting to question you about the loan application. And about the flagged alias tied to a missing persons inquiry. That did it. Her composure cracked completely, her lips trembling, not with sadness, but with rage. None of that was proven, she spat. Nothing was ever proven. Yet you always ran, Frank replied calmly. And this time, you ran straight into the wrong family. Ethan sank into his chair, head in his hands. The weight of betrayal hit him like a physical blow. And for the first time since she entered his life, he finally saw her for who she truly was. Not a wife. Not a partner. Not a victim. A predator. And in that room, surrounded by her own lies laid bare, her reign over my son ended. She wasn't the one in control anymore. The mask was gone. The truth was exposed. And the consequences were just beginning. When the meeting ended, she didn't walk out, she fled. Officers intercepted her as she reached the building's exit, their quiet, firm instruction halting her in place. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She simply froze, as if calculating her next persona, her next lie, her next escape hatch. But this time, there was nowhere left to run. For the first time in months, I felt something unclench in my chest. Relief didn't come all at once, it crept in slowly, like warmth returning to frozen fingers. My son stood beside me in the hallway, his face drained, his expression hollowed by the collapse of an illusion he had built his new life on. "Dad," he whispered, voice cracking. How did I not see it? I placed a hand on his shoulder, the same way I used to after a scraped knee or a broken heart. "You trusted her," I said. "And that's not a weakness. It's part of who you are." He looked at me then, not as a son who thought his father was overreacting, jealous, or meddling, but as a man who had finally woken up from a long, dangerous dream. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For not listening. For shutting you out." "You don't owe me an apology," I answered. "You just needed to see the truth for yourself." He nodded slowly, wiping his eyes. "What do I do now?" "You rebuild," I told him. "One day at a time. And you let me be here when you need me. That's all." We walked out of the mediation center together, the dusk settling over the parking lot like a soft curtain. The sky was streaked with orange and purple, colors Olivia loved. As we stepped outside, a breeze brushed my face, carrying with it the scent of late autumn. For the first time in years, the silence between us wasn't heavy. It wasn't painful. It was peaceful. When we reached my truck, Ethan hesitated. "Dad, did you ever think she could have hurt me?" I looked at him, really looked at him, my son, the boy who once clung to my hand crossing the street, the man who tried to fill his mother's absence with the wrong person, the person who almost lost everything without realizing it. "Yes," I said honestly. "I think she already started." He swallowed hard. But then, something shifted, something quiet but unmistakable. His posture straightened. His voice steadied. "You saved me." I shook my head. "You saved yourself by finally seeing her for who she was." He managed a small smile. It was tired, worn out, but real. As he drove away, I stood by my truck for a long moment, listening to the wind move through the empty lot. I thought of my wife, how she'd always warned me about trusting too easily, how she'd always said that love without clarity becomes blindness. She was right. And that was the lesson I carried home with me. Love is a gift. Trust is a choice. But blind trust? Blind trust is a weapon someone else can use to destroy everything you cherish. Before I went inside my house, I paused and asked the same question I now ask you. If you discovered your son's spouse had built their entire life on lies, what would you do? And if you enjoy stories like this one, real, raw, and painfully human, don't forget to subscribe. There's always more to learn from the shadows people try to hide.